let's welcome our speakers. We have Kristen, Dustin, Misty, and me. Kristen, would you like to share your story?
Absolutely. Hey, everyone. My name is Kristen. I am based out of Toronto, Canada. I've been working in design systems on and off for the past 5 years. Started off in the startup space, not really knowing much about building design systems. I had consumed them up until that point, but I was tasked with building one from scratch, and that was really scary. But it taught me a lot. It taught me things that I still carry forward till this day in my career. I'm currently at Intuit as a product design manager, and I manage a team of 5 designers amongst the broader design system team. And we focus on foundational aspects of the design system, like components, patterns, and of course, documentation. So very excited to be here and share my knowledge with y'all.
Love it. Dustin, would you like to go next?
Yeah, absolutely. Originally from Austin, Texas, currently just outside of Boston, Massachusetts. Until very recently, I was a lead documentation engineer at Indeed. Came on board there about 7 years ago and kind of got to see the whole life cycle. We took on an existing design system, wasn't very good, made a better one, and documented the whole thing. That was incredibly educational on many fronts.
Misty, would you like to go next?
Hello, I'm in the north end of the San Francisco Bay Area over here in California. And I've been working on design system materials for about 7 years now. Most recently, I built from the ground up and with the team of folks at Rubber Half, their most current design system and component library.
Love it. And my name is Farid. I'm living in Santa Clara, Bay Area. Really excited to welcome all of you and have a discussion about documentation and design systems. Great. So the goal is we will be talking all about documentation. Its role, structure, tools, integrations, and the feedback loops that keep design systems alive. And of course, we'll talk about AI at the end as well. But if you would like to join our community and also have access to all the recordings, feel free to register. If you haven't registered on the event page itself, please do that. And also join our Slack channel. If you will have any questions about design systems, that's the place to ask them and connect with other like-minded people. Great. So let's get started with the quick icebreaker. There is a maturity model that I recently released, open source, where there is like 5 different levels of the maturity. The main purpose here is to provide a tool for teams to self-assess themselves and understand where they are and where they would like to be. You can get the free copy. It's open source. The link is on the right side. Just click on this plus button under each of the levels if you feel like your current design system is currently on the level 3 or level 4 or level 2. This is mostly like design perspective on the design system maturity. So that's why we have UI kit and design library. The content and engineering perspective will be a little bit different, but the third level is the place where every discipline is connected together, like design, code, content, accessibility. And level 4 is when your design system is being used across multiple products. That provides additional complexity to the governance model and the ways how we work. Let me go into our secret board and we will start with a couple discussions here. I would like to start with what's the main value of documentation. Dustin, you had some thoughts on that. Would you like to go first and just hear your perspective? What's the core value of documentation from your perspective?
Yeah, what I have come to is documentation is kind of the core of things, because documentation is how you codify your agreements. So a design system is just, this is how we build stuff. Every design system is different because every place builds things differently, and that's okay. Documentation is how you share that amongst yourselves so that you know that everybody's doing it the way that everybody else does it at a given place.
Do you have your own definition of design system documentation? What's the main value of it?
I would echo what Dustin said, but analogy that I really like is that you buy a microwave. We know how to use microwaves, but a lot of them are designed differently. They have a bajillion buttons, some are a little bit more advanced. And so it still needs to come with a manual. That goes for a lot of products. And design systems are very, very complex things. I would compare them to rocket ships. And so, of course, you would really need that Bible, that manual. And it is a core part of the product that is a design system.
Love it, love it, love it. This is great. Let's move to the next topic, the 3-stage evolution. of different design systems. When I see other teams who are creating design systems, they go through this like 3 main stages of evolution. The first stage is called the more is better trap, where we're adding a lot of things. Like there's like the documentation becomes very overcrowded. There are so many things happening inside, but it's really hard to find things, right? The stage 2, concise cheat code approach, where we are starting prioritizing the right things and we are focusing on the right ways how to communicate and how to pass the message related to our documentation guidelines, right? And the stage 3, I feel like this is something new, as we discussed, right? The main value of documentation is to get insight on what are our like agreements are related to patterns, components, tokens, and assets. So the recent trend right now is there is a lot of different MCP servers. And there's one example that I would like to highlight is ChatCN MCP server that you can easily set up your own MCP server and just chat with it and get the insights that you are looking for. But let's go back a little and think about the ways. What kind of main approaches have you seen that are successful when it comes to documenting design systems? Kristen, you mentioned that you had some kind of flow charts or decision charts that helps people to understand which pattern, which component to use at a specific point of time for a specific use case. Would you like to share some of your best practices on how to make design system documentation more easier to consume?
Yeah, certainly. So I think the key here is to make them interactive. What I have done is created, flow charts or exciting imagery and artifacts to really help illustrate how things become used or how to make certain decisions. Because one thing that we've noticed through research is that designers are very lazy. And what that means is they don't want to go to, let's say, a website and read long form documentation to find an answer to their question. It takes a lot of time, it breaks their workflow. And so if we can break that down into more bite-sized artifacts, that really, really helps them to understand what they're looking for and then move back to their native environment, in this case, Figma.
Misty, do you have any thoughts on the ways how to improve the quality of documentation, making maybe adding some more materials, specific things inside so that it will be easier for people on the other side to consume this knowledge?
Yeah, to Kristen's point, for us, we actually started talking about doing small video tutorials, especially with things that are a little bit more complicated, making it faster and easier to actually access the content. But I do think that next stage that's coming with AI, instead of just having a search engine, something that actually can compile everything together for you for a question, I think is going to be super helpful. But yeah, we're in between that stage of more is great, but being concise and then just trying to meet with the teams that are consuming it, helping them on a very consistent basis. Because I think a lot of people focus on onboarding when someone first starts and here's our thing. And instead, just kind of giving them small bits and pieces on a continual basis is also very helpful.
Dustin, do you have any interesting thoughts? I remember we spoke about during our dry run, where you had some like really interactive component visualizations where it could like show the spacing.
Yeah, absolutely. But I would just say, just to tag on to what Misty was saying, we know in product that big bang releases are bad. And we also need to remember that counts for internal tools as well. Incremental improvements are so much better than spending a month or a quarter on a feature that nobody actually wants. But yeah, so specifically on the documentation website for the Indeed design system, we had a lot of different inputs and we wound up using Markdown at the end of the day rather than CMSs. And with Markdown, people often think that, well, that's going to make things very, very static, very boring. But once you have a good base to work from, then you can start adding things into Markdown. Specifically, we're using MDX, which is a slightly more advanced Markdown that lets you embed HTML and React directly into the Markdown file. So we had not only code samples where you could look at a given component and play around with the different prompts available to it. So you can see if I make it this color or make it that color, what does that wind up looking like? How does that look in real life? But we also were able to build custom React components for the documentation itself, whether that's something very simple like the do's and don'ts. We call it the stoplight widget that everybody loves, but also more complicated things like color charts showing all of our different palettes. So letting people see that, letting people look at all of our tokens, whether it's our global tokens or semantic token levels, seeing how those interact with each other, and then also getting different outputs because we supported not only like web and React, but also for a while we supported SCSS. And then most recently we started supporting React Native and Web, Swift and Kotlin Native. So you're able to get all of those things out of a very simple data source of Markdown or JSON files.
Love it, love it. And one of the examples that I really like is Spectrum Design System, where they have, at the end, they have this design checklist and changelog. Again, like this is one of the best approaches to bring more trust, right? And more transparency into the internal processes of the design system. Maybe in some cases it might be too much for the public-facing design system, but for internally, like everyone loves this kind of checklist where they can see the status of some things like accessible content for text or something else where like it's all well documented here. Dustin, you mentioned markdowns, right? Let's talk about that. Like, why do you feel like markdowns are like this future universal language?
Yeah, I think Markdown is the lowest common denominator that a lot of different tools can interact with. And that's what makes it powerful. It's plain text, so you're not locked into a specific vendor's file format. If you've ever tried to open a sketch file 5 years later, good luck. All of the content is in plain text. You can layer things on top of it if you're using something like MDX, which is amazing. But yeah, the time that I worked on the website, we tried 3 different CMSs and always came back to Markdown. We always wanted a CMS because, a non-technical, non-developers, program people, content people wanted just like a WYSIWYG, but it just wound up nobody was ever happy with that because it was never a good enough tool for everybody. And the maintenance burden of something like that is pretty immense. We did begin looking into markdown-based CMSs, which are very promising. There's one that used to be called Netlify CMS. They've changed the name of that to one that I'm forgetting right now. And then there's other ones. Tina CMS is a very nice looking front-end based editor. There are ways to bring CMS features into the Markdown world. But at the end of the day, Markdown, it's plain text. You can version control it very easily within your repository. And there are ways to make it more manageable for people who, they look at it, they think it's code. It's not really code, it's just text. And it's a way to, simplify things. I think one of the biggest issues we had over the years was designers love to design. And that means that when they're writing documentation, they want to design that documentation. And that's where you get into trouble because unless your documentation is only going to live inside of Figma, that's a terrible place to write your documentation.
Yeah, you mentioned Misty. Is that the one that you refer to?
So Fuma, oh yeah, Tina CMS. Yes, that works really well. Decap is what it wound up being called.
Love it. So this is like a good way for people to collaborate using the Markdown. Yeah. Great. Kristen, do you have any thoughts on the Markdown? Like, do you believe it's a future universal language? Like, we all understand that there are some limitations, right? And GX might help with some custom visualizations, but like, what are your thoughts on the Markdown and where things can be documented? Because Dustin mentioned Figma. Like, what are your thoughts? Like, where the documentation should be living, and like any like general thoughts on the Markdown itself?
Yeah. So we came to the realization that Markdown was super powerful and the ideal solution for us through many, many errors. So we've had various forms of documentation sites throughout the years, and they've all just failed in their own ways. The reason for that is because it's really difficult to update that information. And we have multiple surfaces for documentation because ultimately we're trying to have docs in designer's native environment, developer's native environment, a single source of truth in the form of a website. And so, of course, things become stale, and that's a problem. And so when we looked at all the solutions on the table, Markdown was the best. So the idea is that we would put all of our docs into GitHub in the form of Markdown, and that will enable us to surface to multiple places and have that same source of truth, which is why we decided to move forward with that. In regards to the surfaces themselves, it's still okay to have docs in Figma, but they shouldn't be there statically. And so what we're exploring are plugins that pull in the markdown files from the GitHub repo that I just spoke of. And
Mhm.
that's there for designers to consume within Figma. And it's the same documentation that would surface in our website, in our VS Code plugins, any other tooling that we build and want to have docs in. It's all the same content. So that's why we think that Markdown is very powerful. Also, it helps to feed our LLMs and leverage AI, things like that. So it's a very powerful technology.
So do you envision some kind of tool that will pull the data from the GitHub as a markdown file and then will put it into Figma? Do you envision that as Figma component documentation or just as a frame where it's all like captured within the canvas?
So again, a plugin, and if like we have a plugin that exists today, it has
Mhm.
a library of all of our components and our tokens, our colors, things like that. And so our docs are within that plugin, which is really great. And you can also pull it into the canvas from that plugin.
Love it. And let's talk about the like one of my favorite tools when it comes to Markdown to HTML is the Figma Docs. It's open source, and actually you can not only use Markdown, you can use also MDX. This is like more advanced version of the Markdown, where as Dustin mentioned, you can add your custom blocks. And for example, if you would like to visualize design checklist in this kind of format where there will be a success icon or not applicable statuses. You can do that within your own React component and then just hold it as a part of the markdown and it will be all captured here nicely. Dustin, do you have any thoughts on like what kind of tools are available on the market when it comes to like visualizing documentation websites?
Yeah, that was actually the last project I was working on. Was we were planning on replatforming our entire website. Fumadocs was kind of top of the list. So they're all kind of wrapped around different technology stacks, which is a little bit frustrating. But you find the one that kind of works for your system. Some tools kind of want you to build a design system to fit them, and that's a no-go for me. Like, I need my design system to be built the way I need it built, and then we figure everything else out later. So Fumadocs is really great. Docusaurus has come a long way. That's one that's built by a team at Facebook, and they've recently upgraded some of the internals, and it is astoundingly fast to build things, which is really great. And I think it opened up a lot of avenues for things. I think those are kind of the top two that I was looking at. Don't think so. Those are some of the ones we were looking at most heavily. There are other ones that are just kind of bigger. So there's like Axtro is for building a website of any type. And so there are some starters that can get you going on documentation, but it's not the best for that. And then in the Next.js environment, Fumadocs is the big one, but we were also looking at one called Nextra, which is actually what the Next.js team uses to build their own documentation website.
Love it, love it. Yeah, I saw some discussions from the Next Vercel team where one of the people like who worked there, they started Nextra, but the Fumadocs was like more easier. But like I didn't go too deep into this topic, but yeah. Love it. Missy, what is your thought on documentation websites, right? Do you believe having custom built website by using Fumadocs or any other things is an interesting way, or do you see any market players on the like tools on the market that are easier to start with and just iterate and go from there?
Yeah, I love the idea of having a custom site and being able to put those resources towards it. We actually, when we started ours, did not have that type of resource and team available. Like you guys were talking about, we needed something that people could contribute to that didn't have a technical background. And in fact, there was quite a few people that it needed to be extended to. So I do think that a CMS is still helpful for those teams that are in the middle, depending on resource allocation. But also it depends on your team structures as well. Because for us, we don't just think about the design components and the dev components. There's also brand team documentation, there's content team documentation, there's international content. So there was a lot more folks that needed to be involved and needed to be able to review and have that kind of interface. So I think it depends on where you're at. But I do think that some of this is going to be the direction that things have to go in order to plug into some of the AI systems in the future, in order to consume the content really well. And I think that's going to be the key of where everyone goes in the future is scale, feasibility, and then just how does everything connect? And I know we're in this land of we don't know yet. So it's exciting to see that grow.
Love it, love it. This first question, how has AI played in part in your system documentation journeys? Who would like to go first?
Can go really quick. So really only recently have I been able to take a really deep look into AI. How is it going to connect? How are all these MCP servers all humming up and available? I think at an enterprise level, it is a little bit difficult because there's the extra layer of security and proprietary information. So I think in the next year, it's going to be interesting to see where that goes and how far we can actually push things.
Yeah, I mean, at Indeed, we were really kind of behind the curve because just that, like the proprietary information angle of things, like our design system was internal only and the rest of our code was internal only. So we had to wait until contracts were signed before we could even start touching these things. We first learned that people wanted to use AI on the design system because somebody made a commit to our Git repo, which was kind of funny. And I couldn't figure out exactly what was going on, but it was somebody that was taking our component documentation markdown files, squishing them into one big file, and then using that inside of their IDE. And we're like, oh, okay. You didn't have to commit that to our repo, but thanks. It told us that the appetite was there and it gave us a direction to go in. So it was
Love
great.
it, love it, love it. Yeah, speaking about the documentation, right? Let's chat about AI enablement, where there are new tools on the market that are helping people to get the data, to get the answer to their question when it comes to the design system. So one of them is Infa. So you can actually, it's a Chrome extension that lets you see all your components in the browser. If I will go into the device here, I'm able to turn on the discovery mode and see all the components actually being used in the product. And there is a question on the chat, how to measure the design system. It also helps you to measure the design system used within your product. But when it comes to documentation and conversations, let me show one of the examples here is how you can do that is there is an Info AI assistant where you can ask questions, for example, hey, can you check a list of our components and then compare it with our documentation website on the current page? So as you can see, there is a list of components on the right side. And there, like this is, for example, WISE documentation, right? By asking questions, it can go and scan the current page that you have, a list of all of your components that you have in your design system, and tell you what kind of like new things you have in your design system or what kind of things are missing in your documentation. You can also ask questions like, can you open the tabs documentation link and then check the page and tell me if we support it on Android as well? And because it's a Chrome extension, it can actually do things for you as well. So it will active, like as you saw, it opened the tabs page and it went through that, got the markdown file out of it, and can give you a quick explanation on that as well. For example, another thing, if you would like to connect different things together, like design, code, and maybe even Jira tickets, you can also say that, can you please update the external links for the tab component? Here's the link to our design. So it can go and understand what kind of tab components you have and update the links. So if I will go into this tab component, you'll be able to see that it added those links to your documentation. And then you can just pull it through the API and have all these things ready. And if you have new components to add, you can always select new things and say, like, here is a component variation that we didn't think about. Let's add it to the documentation, and you can do that as well. So like it's helps you to tag components, document components, measure the adoption, and do fun AI stuff. Great. So I hope we were able to answer this question when it comes to AI. There's another example that I really would like to share is, let me pull this section here. We had it as a part of, yes, let me just add it here on the side. The chat CN documentation. So let me just copy that and go into the chat CN components. One of the interesting examples is within the documentation website. They are also using MDX markdown file, but there is a way to copy the page as a markdown and copy this conversation in, like, copy this markdown and open in ChatGPT, Claude, or any other things. So if I will just click on that, you will be able to see the markdown file of this page that you can give it to AI, to Cursor, and then do some fun stuff with it. Great. Let's go to the next question. That's it. When it comes to AI, like, have you seen any like interesting examples where people could just ask questions and get answers to their design system documentation?
Well, so far I haven't seen anything that was correct 100% of the time, that's for sure. I think the best things that I've seen are integrating that knowledge where you're trying to use it. So mostly that's inside of a VS Code or another IDE. An additional layer of autocomplete, I think, works really well. I've seen it work really well to just kind of scaffold something brand new very quickly. So it's like, I need a page with 3 cards and a 3-up layout, and it can give you that really easily. And then you can go in and fine tune it and make the corrections you need. That's some of the best stuff that I've seen.
Love it, love it. Misty, do you have any interesting thoughts on AI part of the design systems?
Yeah, I'm with Dustin. I think a lot of it right now that's successful is the autocomplete. I do know they're in progress for getting information out, but to his point, some of it isn't correct yet. It's still hallucinating on some things. I was like, oh, where did you get that from? And then some companies are definitely starting to bridge that proprietary gap, which is also the issue that we've had. I think once some of that starts happening, we'll end up with more robust tools that'll actually help get us to that space, at least as a first step.
There is a very good example from Polaris design system where they built the Visual Studio Code extension for autocomplete. Without any UI, it works. Without any AI, and it helps engineers to have autocompleted within their code environment. Kristen, do you have any, like, I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts on the AI part, so would you like to share?
Yeah, so we're building a lot of internal tooling with AI in it. And the biggest one right now that I would find helpful for our design system folks is a tool that scrapes our Slack channels and is able to pull up past inquiries and answers that we've provided. And so that question doesn't need to be asked again because this AI tool can just pull it up and say, this is what was asked, this was the answer, and here's the resolution if there was one that was returned in the thread. And so it's a really cool way to not have to ask us the same question again. Another thing is we're trying to build AI natively into our new documentation site. And again, there are some challenges. It doesn't always have that accuracy, but we are trying to get that right at this time.
And how have you tried any tools when it comes to like updating documentation with all those insights into the documentation? How do you capture all those answers if they are really good questions? Maybe there is a gap in documentation. How do you update the documentation back? Like, do you have that in more automated way, or it's mostly done by humans?
As of right now, unfortunately, it's still by humans.
Yeah, there is another interesting tool is Cursor background agents where you can Cursor background agent. There is a link. Let me check. I believe I added that somewhere. Yes, in process specific discussions. So the new interesting way how you can get those insights, get those questions, and add it to the documentation is by using Cursor background agents. I've seen some examples where teams were just in background agents to update the documentation on their specific repository just by copying and pasting the question and answer. And at the end of the day, it creates a pull request and you can review that. And if you're happy with it, you can just merge it and update your documentation really, really fast. So like this is like the future. So just starting adopting it, but it's pretty exciting. Love it. Great. Let's get back to the questions. How can we explain a design system to a stakeholder who isn't ready to follow it? And how can we help teach them why it matters?
Ooh, I can quickly take a stab at this one since I've done this in the past. Working for a startup, they've never heard of a design system. You know that the company needs one. It's really tough, but the easiest way to get buy-in is to speak their language. So again, if you're at a startup and you're pitching to the CEO, they probably care about business metrics. And so that's what you're going to use in that conversation is we're trying to save the business time and money. Design systems can do that. We can build efficiency. We can build better products that our customers want to buy and continue to buy. And again, design systems enable that. So really forming that conversation around that, if that's who you're pitching to, is really powerful. And if it's not the CEO and it's the CTO, again, it's more about dev velocity, having clean code, etc. That would be my piece of advice.
Yeah, I think the one thing I would add there is also make sure you need one. I don't think a design system is right for every organization. If you're particularly small, if you have one designer, you don't need a design system. The designer can take care of it. Design systems are really part of the maturity of an organization. So don't try to push for it too early just because you want to play with it, because that can be detrimental long term to ever having a design system in a specific org.
I have a hot take, and I would love to get your reactions on that. I feel like the mistake that some teams are making, they are trying to create documentation for foundational elements. My take is if you are just starting, don't try to create your own foundational design system. ChatCN is a good open source option, right? And instead of focusing on the buttons, checkboxes, search bars, you could actually focus on more like patterns and templates. So for example, if you are working in finance domain, you could visualize the pattern, the flow of how people can order a debit card in your product and in your competitors, right? And you could capture what kind of components are being used and how consistent the experience is and how easy to use, right? So my take is instead of focusing on the foundational design systems, it's better to move a little bit to another spectrum where you will focus more on the templates and like more specific, domain specific organisms that is not available on the market, but you can document it internally within the organization, capture some of the really good decisions and start from there. But curious to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I think the most important things are probably the bigs and the littles. So your tokens and your patterns. You need to all be using the correct typography and the correct colors. But then after that, yeah, the page level stuff is way more important. I think people go for components because it's a checklist and it's pretty straightforward. But the hours burned arguing about buttons and button links and link buttons could be much better spent doing something else.
Yeah, and I think there's just so many systems that are already out there that you can borrow from for those smaller things. Great. We all know what a checkbox is. We know what a radio button is. We know what a drop down is. But understanding when to use each of those pieces, the patterns of using them within your product, that was the important part that everyone kept getting hung up on. Not about the state of the checkbox, but actually what was the usage of it. So focusing on that a bit would be definitely helpful if, a team is really small or that mid-sized company that doesn't need to invest in all of it.
How have you encountered pushback on investing in documentation and how did you demonstrate the value?
I can start with that one. So it's very much what Kristen was saying a moment ago about selling the design system. I was the stakeholder. I was the product owner for the design system. And really what helped me understand what was going on, what people needed from different documentation standpoint is I would have a team come to me and say, we just had 10 hours of meetings and 50% of that was about character counts in these types of components. Can we get that added so that we don't repeat this next quarter when we redo this project again? Because it was constant releases. So those types of things, understanding the value, the metrics, where is it going to save the team's time, helps us prioritize those things. What teams is it helping? What money is it saving? And how is it expediting our processes?
And to add to that, what's the worst case scenario if we don't move forward with building our documentation? And to me, we're going to see churn. We're going to see people move away from the system, start building outside of the system, breaking it because they don't know what they're doing. And that's not good, obviously, right? And so really want to sell like, this is critical. And these are the things that are going to happen if we don't continue to invest in our documentation. It is an essential part of the system for many reasons. Another being contribution. We all have different contribution models, and a big part of contribution is documenting how it works. And if you don't have that, the system also doesn't grow because people aren't contributing back.
And what kind of data points we could use in order to show the value of documentation? I feel like documentation is just like one part of the design system, right? The value of the design system we can capture through the usage and adoption across the products. But if we will focus only on the documentation website, what's the value? Because with MCPs, you don't need to read stuff. You can just ask question and get an answer. So in that case, like, what's the value? How to communicate the value of the documentation website itself?
I think you really have to look outside of that for that answer. Like you need to talk to the people who are using it, like consumer satisfaction style work, as well as, if you have a support Slack channel, what's the volume in there? Has the volume gone down? Are there more unique questions than there used to be? It's kind of hard to pin down an exact usage of documentation or the importance of it to leadership. But I think pointing to those other things, like are users happier using your system now because you have better documentation? Even with something, if you are using AI, if you have a custom MCP, that content has to come from somewhere. You can't just feed it here. So whether or not it's on a website, the documentation still needs to be read and still needs to be fed into the machine.
Love it. Love it. So Dustin, you really raised a really good point, right? Volume of questions. First of all, it's good that people are asking questions, but the second part is if there's too many questions, that means that, yes, like documentation is not highlighting things well enough, right? So I feel like closing this loop of what kind of questions people are asking, adding them into our documentation and seeing if everything works. Like this is like the main way how you can understand the value of documentation. And I really like the thing that you highlighted. Are the users happier? Do you do some kind of surveys every quarter, every month, just to understand how well design system performs?
Yeah, we were running regular surveys of our users as well as doing more qualitative sit-down interviews with specific stakeholders just to get feedback on how they were using things.
There's also another...
And I think the perspective of questions is interesting as well, because as you're stating, there's less questions, it means the documentation's doing better. I actually was viewing that a little differently as we were having people adopt our system. As the fewer questions, the more I wondered if they were having issues, and the more we did some of that outreach, because I wasn't sure if they were actually truly adopting it and stuff. So I think the combo there that you were talking about, of surveys, interviews, that all is super helpful to get the actual data of usage, volume, and how is it working, not just one part of the data.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that we ran into was, for lack of a better term, the dark support that was going on. Because there are people who are reticent to ask a question in a public setting, like in a public Slack channel. So you need to make sure that if your teammates are being asked 8,000 questions a day in direct messages, because that happens quite a bit. Sniff around and see if you can find private chat rooms where people are talking about the design system, just so you get a better idea of, are you providing what is needed?
So I guess with MCPs in the future, let's try to brainstorm on the future state, right? With MCPs, you can always, if there's a question in Slack, you can just tag Slack bot from your design system that will just use MCP on the background to answer this question, right? But also capture what kind of query people had and what the response was, right? Maybe having access to this design system assistance on the background, seeing what kind of questions people are asking, what's the volume, and what's the traffic coming in, and what's the traffic on our documentation website. This is the way how you can capture how good your design system performs. And also, based on the responses, you can see and assess maybe the quality of the responses in order to see if you will need to update your documentation, or maybe the answer from the design system assistant might be wrong in the first place. So having everything pushed into this design system assistant, capture all the queries and iterate from there might be an ideal state for the future of design systems.
from what I'm seeing, I do think that's where we're going. I think it's going to take a while to get the different parts and pieces together. Because to Dustin's point, like we've still got to feed it the documentation for it to give a good response, train it on what a good response is. What I'd really love to see personally, and I know this is far out there still, is actually having the AI have access to our systems and help even write the documentation, understanding in our platforms and how the platforms work, what the component is actually doing, how it's behaving, being able to even flag for us like, hey, this component was used in a not so normal way. I think that all of that is to come. I think it's just getting there piece by piece, right? You can't, but I think from a design system perspective, I think things will probably change in the next couple of years a lot with AI and how we build things, how the system actually works itself and where it's actually delivered at.
Love it. I really like the idea from Kalik saying that if you have a search field in your docs, track all search queries, especially the keywords that return no results. It means you need to add docs for that topic. This is really interesting insight. Thank you very much for sharing. Let's move to the questions. Any recommendation tools to measure the design system usage? I can go first. With InfoAI, you can actually measure page adoption within the product for free. You don't need to pay anything extra. You can see what kind of components are contributing to your design system adoption within the web, within the product itself. But I know that there is like omelette.dev that helps you to analyze the repository, the GitHub repository, and also Figma Analytics. You can use it to capture the usage, but it will, like all those tools will not tell you the adoption per product. It will tell you the usage, right? If there is a spike of activity in your Figma Analytics, that means there might be a discovery session, right? But it doesn't mean that it will go to your product itself. And the main value of the design system is making sure that things are being used in the product, right? And decisions are being reused as a result. So with Info, you can measure the adoption, but if you want to measure usage, you can use Figma Analytics. And on the code side, omelette.dev or write your own GitHub action scripts that will just go through the code base and see how many mentions of your components are being used in the files. Do you have any thoughts on how to measure design system usage?
It's very hard to do it in a satisfying way. To me, I think it comes down to just like figuring out how to measure the other intangibles, like the user experience. I think a really good one is UX quality, is what we referred to it, where, broken experiences and all those little tickets that get put in Jira about like, this doesn't look right, that doesn't look right. If more people are using the design system, that stuff goes away. And that provides a better experience for the end user, and it frees up time for your teams to actually build the things that you need to build. But yeah, we tried several different ways to measure things, and it was never satisfying to leadership, and it was very difficult for us to do. So I think I don't personally see a ton of value in it. I think, focus on the other things that you can measure better.
But any final thoughts on that question, or we can move on to the next one? The next question is, I'm working on a multi-theme design system. While our core design system is well documented, we'll also build local pattern libraries to handle multi-theme needs. Will we create separate documentation for multi-theme or incorporate it within the core system documentation? Misty.
I can
Yeah,
take
Kristen.
a stab at
Yeah.
Yeah, so we're actually dealing with this right now. And my take is that it should not be separate, especially if it is a child of the main design system. You want to keep everything together. And so how we're solving from that is theming within the docs themselves. And so let's say I'm on the parent theme for a button. I should be able to theme that doc to whatever the brand is. And the doc can change dynamically to show me what's relevant for that brand itself, including the theme itself. All the colors change, irrelevant docs are removed, and what is relevant is brought in. And that really helps to keep things nice, neat, and tidy and relevant to one another. So that's what we're trying to build right now.
Great. I know that we have only a couple minutes left, but it was a really interesting discussion. So we had a lot of thoughts on the future of the design system, how documentation, future of documentation of design systems might look like. Thank you very much for joining the session and sharing all your thoughts here. And I hope it was really interactive. My top 3 highlights is the future of MCPs, right? Because at the end of the day, As we discussed in the beginning, the design system documentation is a collection of your aligned decisions that you've made across patterns, components, tokens, and stuff. So this loop is very important. But Dustin, what are your top 3 highlights out of this discussion?
It's the heart of everything. Make sure you put at least some time and effort into it. And don't treat a documentation website as a static thing. Let it do what it needs to fit the needs of your organization. Maybe the documentation website is just there to be fed into your MCP server. That's fine, because that's what you need.
Misty?
I agree with Dustin. You can have components and libraries and stuff, but without the documentation, it really can't be functional. Additionally, I think the thing about documentation is to document what you need, what your company needs. There are going to be variances between things, and it does not all have to be the same. Focus on the things that are critical to you and your teams, and that'll help make it successful. It doesn't have to be everything. It just has to be what you need.
Kristen, do you have any highlights out of our discussion today?
Yeah, it's obvious how many moving parts go into building documentation. And so again, it's really important that it's not a one-off project, that you can continuously build upon it, maintain it. You have resourcing to help further it moving forward. You have a plan. It's on your roadmap. No matter how big or small your team is, you have a plan in place. Very important, A. And B, make sure it is user-friendly, because you have users that are going to be consuming it. Apply the same research principles that you would to building anything else. And so that would be my 2 takeaways.
Love it. And the FigJam file will stay. It will be available. The recording will be shared in a couple of days. So feel free to join the Stack community. It will be available there as well. So thank you, Kristen, Dustin, Misty, for joining the session. It was a pleasure. I personally learned a lot. So really exciting, really good discussion. So thank you. Thank you very much. I will update the link to Slack in a second. Thank you very much, and I'll see you around next time. Take care.